You are in the position of being either talent wrangler or zookeeper or sumo wrestler, depending on who it is. In other words, some people you have to hop around on one foot because your other foot is up their backside. Other people, you have to type with one hand because you have to hold theirs while you edit.
Yeah, and you have to learn to be not a different person, but you have to exercise muscles that you didn't have before. Being a writer is your thing. You've got your piece, you're worried about your space, and it's innately, and I think in a good sense, a selfish, selfish isn't quite the word I'm looking for, less opprobrium attached to it.
I've seen you quoted with it, so just go with it.
But an editor, it's all about getting you, David Carr, to do the best that you possibly can, for me to be looking out on the horizon about who's got some talent, young, middle-aged, or old, who that we can bring into the New Yorker, or I can bring into the New Yorker, and I'm doing that all the time. So the powers of assurance, of giving confidence to somebody else, to make sure that they know that they have the freedom and capacity, and at the same time, pushing as well. I'm actually not, I can be quite tough, which I never had to be in any role other than the occasional parental situation. It's very different set of muscles.
I've been in the office and I've heard the shrieking. This is not typing. This is not writing. This is typing. Get it out of here. Do you, in terms of like sort of operant metaphors of running, and I don't think you should give the impression that the New Yorker is this sort of twee apparatus. It's
no, it's not twee either in sensibility, and nor is it twee in its place in the culture, I hope.
Because metabolically, it's a huge thing that you have to put out every single week.
Yeah, first of all, it's a blast.
Right.
It's really fun, and we are in the position, culturally and otherwise, where we can, it's not an unusual day where Milan Kundera or Philip Roth or John Updike is a regular staffer.
Right.
He's faxing stuff in and he's waiting for his edits and dealing with the checker. Any day now he'll
So how do you tell John Updike you don't like how his story starts?
You do, and if you can't
do
that, you can't play.
Really?
You cannot play, and it's like a jockey and a horse. A horse knows when the jockey has no confidence and no sense of the mount. Right. And not that you're riding John Updike by any stretch of the imagination. Horrible metaphor number 2. But Updike doesn't want to be repetitive. He doesn't want, does he make fewer false steps than most? You bet you he does. But does he have to be rewritten? No. Is he there because he's a monster reporter and you have to make sense of what? No, that's not him. But first of all, not all his stories get taken, as he will tell you, regale you over the years, and that happened for decades. And it's a conversation. It's not an abusive one. It's not a theatrical one. It's what he needs to do his best work.
In terms of being a writer, and we'll talk about the fact that you punch in and actually do God's work every once in a while, but the rest of the time you're editing. And sorry.
Look, I agree with you. It's not the first time I've ever said it, David, but I grew up with the same attitude towards editors that you did. I was covering a fight in Las Vegas with Shirley Povich, now dead, who was a great sports writer for the Washington Post for about 65 years. And in fact, he was in Who's Who in American Women every year, and they used to send a questionnaire and say, did gender ever hold you back in your chosen profession? And every year he'd check no. And so Shirley and I were covering a fight. Marvelous Marvin Hagler and I forget, Tommy Hearns. A lot of fight fans here at NYU? Not a lot. Okay. And I had written some.
If you're talking academic politics, boy.
I had written some, and you have to do it it's like oral history on the fly. You can't type. You do round by round like Clem McCarthy, and you blah, 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 and then it's assembled in-house, and then they read you back the lead. And the lead they read me back was, it made UPI seem like Ulysses. They'd taken out all my poetical flourishes, all my fantastic stuff, and I started doing what you do when you're 27 years old and you want to prove your chops as a reporter. You scream at the editor and you slam the phone down, fuck this, fuck rah, rah, rah. And Shirley Povich, then a mere 80 years old, looked up to me and he said, "Young man, an editor is just a mouse training to be a rat." So I learned my lesson. I learned my lesson early, and I have no illusions that being an editor is, part enabler, part courtesan, part, sort of, can I get you some fries with that? And then at times it's also helping to push the recalcitrant thing up the hill.
But in terms of being a writer, maybe you could think about it as, well, I'm still working at a keyboard. It's just composed of incredibly wonderful, powerful human beings. And when I
don't buy it.
Okay,
I think that writing is a. I'm very different from a lot of writers, and I know, and I think this was also a problem for me, learning how to be an editor. I find the act of writing immensely pleasurable. And most of the writers I know spend enormous amounts of time talking about how much they hate to write, the suffering of writing, and there's an almost competitive thing among writers, how much fetching they can do about, and I don't doubt that writing is hard. In fact, maybe if I found it a lot harder and suffered more, I'd be better at it. I don't know. But I found it enormously, and find it enormously pleasurable to be in a room by myself doing that with notes, and fantastic. I think a lot of writers
It beats working,
don't.
let's face it.
Yeah. And editing is not that. If you are only in your room and nobody's coming in through the door and you're only humped over manuscript or the internet or your computer screen, you're not doing your job. Certainly not as the editor.
Right.
Maybe as a copy editor, maybe as a senior editor who's working purely with the text of the day. But if you are not making phone calls and cajoling and finding out and learning and dealing with the world that is your magazine, you're really not doing your work. And that took me a while to learn.